Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, Senior Writing Coach with Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 25, Summer Reset Books. This episode is all about our academic books. So this may be very discipline specific and certainly, very office space specific if you have a lot of space to store books or you don't. But I wanted to focus on this topic because I realized that with academic books, we tend to just accumulate them and we don't often give them away. So what happens is our bookshelves get bigger and bigger with the books that we had from maybe a master's degree, then a PhD. Then as a professor, you've accumulated different books for courses that you're teaching, and then also some books for research. And the pile just grows and grows. And when I was doing my office reset, so if you go back to episode 23, I have a little discussion about kind of cleaning up my academic office a little bit and getting it ready for the fall throughout the month of June. But I left the bookshelves alone. And I purposely did that because I realized that, one, a lot of things that were on the floor in my office were books, so they needed to go back up on the bookshelves. And then once I knew that they had to go there, I realized I really have no place to put these books. And even if I did, where would I put them that it makes sense that I'd find them again? So one of the things I'm going to do is show you a couple of the bookcases that I have and the types of things that you might encounter in your own office, and then offer a couple of strategies about how to decide what to do with these books. If you're keeping them all, great. If you're not, what are some things that you can do with them, and so on. So I'm going to go ahead, for anybody that's watching this on YouTube, I'm going to share a screen and share a couple pictures of books. But if you're looking at this on Apple Podcasts, that's not a problem. You definitely can. It'll still make sense to you if you're just listening along. I'll describe what's on there. So the first bookshelf that I'm showing is a chunk of books on a bookcase. The bookcase that I have in my office has 5 shelves. They're pretty big. They're deep. Not all the shelves are actually holding books. So I just focused on this one chunk of books because it caught my attention. And the main reason this caught my attention is that this particular spot of a shelf, I haven't touched any of these books in a really, really long time. And I know why I haven't touched them. So one of the things that's evident on this bookshelf is way over to the left, there's a bunch of books. There's a French dictionary and a book about learning French. And I know that was all back in my days as a master's student at Cleveland State when I started taking French to have a language ready to go to a doctoral program. And at the time, I was thinking I might do a PhD in literature. And so I started learning a language because I knew I was going to need one. And the joke was on me because I went into rhetoric and composition, and that's how I found faculty writing and my way to defend and publish. So it was actually a happy story. But for whatever reason, I've decided I needed to keep all my French textbooks. So those are there. Other things that are there, there's a big chunk of books that are all about a movement in the mid-90s about cyber girls and about women doing making their own websites and learning how to code and do that. And that was what my dissertation was on. So a lot of these books in the middle are books I definitely cited in my dissertation. And then I also see kind of over to the far right in the picture, I see some books that were also from my master's program where I started doing some work on Homer. And in fact, 1 or 2 of those books over there these were books that I used to do an institute at the Harvard Center for Hellenic Studies a couple of years ago. So it's just a mix of stuff, but it's not stuff I'm going to rely on regularly. So that's just one of the shelves that's in there that's lurking in my academic books. The other shelf that's I would call maybe my main bookshelf has a whole bunch of different books. I'm looking at it, you Google any picture of professors' books and you're going to probably find something that looks very similar. But the main thing looking at this bookshelf is that I can tell quickly that some of these books are about faculty writing and productivity, the area I'm working in now. Some are books I actually use for teaching, and some are used for, I would say they're not research, but they're basically like some books that were written about my discipline of rhetoric and writing studies that I have them. They're interesting. I've read them. I'm not really using them for teaching or research. They're there. I've got some books on there I can see I've never read. And then in the very bottom of the bookcase, I have a whole bunch of books that I used when I was a junior high teacher. And then I used some of those when I first started at the University of Findlay teaching English education and helping pre-service teachers. So Again, a hodgepodge. Some of the books don't fit. That's why they're laying on their sides. Some of them are just thrown on there. Some of them, I don't even know where they came from. I even see some books from film studies when I did that postdoctoral work at Michigan. And then the last shelf, I found this one behind some picture frames because I actually had picture frames in front of it and I realized there were books behind there. So I took the pictures off. Some of these are books more about the profession and being a professor. One is a recent book by Leonard Cassuto, The Graduate School Mess. I know I read that as I was creating my graduate program to try to figure out what are some things. I also see like an ancient Holt handbook for grammar. And I know why I kept that book because it's got this great list of transitions in it that I still make a handout from. But yeah, so, and some of these books are old. Like I know some of those spiral bound ones are guides like APA or MLA that are way outdated. I don't need them anymore. And all of this is to say is that since with academic bookcases, either in our houses or in our offices, or even you might not even have a bookcase, you might just have academic books all over everywhere. If you accumulate them in this way and you don't have them on a Kindle or some kind of an e-reader, is that we do tend to have them and then we just don't ever get rid of any. So one of the things that I'm going to try to do in my 30-day stint in June is just to take quick peeks through and see if I can do something about these books to make them a little bit more functional. And at least for me, what I'm thinking of is putting all my class books that I'm actually using to teach, that I teach my graduate students. I'm thinking of putting those all together, regardless of whether they're about the same subject areas or not, just so they're all in one spot. So I know I'm teaching a class, this is where I find my book. So that was something I know I mentioned in episode 24, when I talked a little bit about digital organization and how to find class files. To me, this is just an extension of that, is to think about how to find these physical books that I'll need. And then I know another thing I'll do is I'm going to take a quick look through and see if there's any books that can be donated. Really, handbooks and things like that that are way out of date might go to be recycled. We have a recycling program where we can do that. And I will also take a look and see if I can find a couple links to textbook recycling or book recycling that might be handy if you've got some books you want to donate, because I know I'm always looking for that. So I will do the legwork and put a couple of links in the show notes if you've got some books you want to get rid of. But then I got to think about a couple other things. Some of the books, like the ones for my dissertation, I do have a very nostalgic affection for these books. I lived with these books for 4 years. I have good notes in them. I don't know that I'll give those away. But what I probably will do is put them somewhere in my office where they're not taking prime real estate, because right now where they are, you can tell those were the first books that I moved into my office because they're kind of in the very first shelf as I walk in the door. And I suspect many of us in a first academic office, or maybe if you've moved a couple of times, books just kind of go where they land the first time and then you don't give them much thought after that. And so I do think that this is important from a writing productivity standpoint, because if we kind of think about the two ways we would be using these books, one would certainly be to support our teaching, right? Either as textbooks or as books to help us like think through the class, or, that we're using as information for that. And so having ready access to those also cuts down on the amount of time you waste looking for things. But the second part would be, of course, all the books that you're reading or that are part of your research. And so another thing that I've thought through in my office is I'm very fortunate that I have 2 bookcases in this particular office that are big. And so I'm going to dedicate one of them to teaching and one of them to research, and just split it that way. It might make more sense for you to have these in different ways. Like maybe you'll have, if you're a tenure track person, maybe you'll have some books and things like that that are just devoted to professor life, things that are like handbooks. Maybe those will go in a special spot. I'm not going to get too granular other than that, because for me, I think that makes sense, that at least I know I only have to look at one bookcase. And then for any books that are sort of an overlap. So for example, I do teach a class on graduate writing. That is also one of my areas of research. I'm just going to look at the book and make the call. Am I actually using this in the class? The class will trump over the research, and I know that I can go in there. So all of this is to say is that I mentioned back in episode 23, thinking about our physical spaces and how they either support our writing or don't support our writing. I also mentioned I don't normally do any writing in my office, but I do want the option to be there, and I do research in my office. So I was trying to think a little bit about how having these books organized a little bit better could support my digital researching. So let's say I have my laptop up in my office, I'm doing some research, I'm doing, maybe taking some notes on some sources, and then I know I have a physical copy of a book. In some ways, it still is faster if you know where the book is to just grab the book, look at page 67, do what you're going to do, and then keep writing versus trying to find the electronic copy and looking it up and remembering. And so that's something that I'm trying to push on myself a little bit more to say, well, if you're going to keep some of these books, they've got to be there. You've got to be using it. And if not, share them and pass them on to grad students or someone else. So one of the other places, in addition to doing some recycling this month and donating some of these books, the other place where I'm going to send some of them will be, I'm fortunate to direct a graduate program. I've mentioned it before in rhetoric and writing. And those students have a building where we have a communal bookshelf. And so I basically just loaded up any books that I thought were relevant that they might want for projects, put a note on it and said, hey, anybody can have these books, use them as long as you want. If you want to return them here, great. If not, great. I did not make a library. I did not worry about checking them out. I don't care if they come back. And I can tell just from looking at that bookcase over the past couple of weeks that students have been taking things that they want and that they need. And then I've also seen them donate some as well. So if you've seen those little lending libraries, I kind of think of it as a little academic lending library for the graduate program. But at least for me, I know that those books are being used. And then finally, one other thing that I started thinking about the bookcases, it's not really about the books at all, but certainly I mentioned a couple episodes ago that I've got, some older and some outdated pictures and things like that in my office. And I did come across, when looking for some organization about books, an article that was this was in Inside Higher Ed in 2007. So it's called An Office of His Own. And if you check out this post, you could see where this person talks about why it's so great to have a faculty office. And I wasn't so interested in some of the other parts of it, although they do kind of touch on some of the things we've been doing for most of the week. But there's a really great section in there where he talks about how professors tend to organize their books. And so some of them, of course, by subject area or chronology, some are alphabetical. One of those systems might be really appealing to you. For me, I just think having a teaching bookshelf and a research bookshelf, good enough. And that's just where I'm going to go with mine. But these give you some other ideas for systems. So it's kind of an interesting essay. And it does talk a little bit about just faculty organization in an office in general. So certainly an opinion piece, but definitely worth checking out. And then, as I mentioned before in the show links, I will make sure that I put in some links to where you might send books for good causes or where you might donate them. It is expensive to ship and recycle or ship and donate books. And I know, poor graduate students and, newer faculty where maybe you just don't have the funds to spend on that kind of postage right now. That might not be a way to do it, but there may be other places. Just as a couple other quick thoughts. I know back when I was a graduate student at Bowling Green, we were able to donate old academic books to the library, and then they sold them in a big academic book sale. So that might be something worthwhile where I just had to take the box across campus. It wasn't a big deal. Certainly I know a lot of faculty will certainly recycle old handbooks and things like that. So if you have a place to do that, sometimes that's near the campus bookstore, the bookstore will take them back. So lots of different options for it. But at least for me, it was more about just having some sense of where I might find a book when I needed it. That was my overarching question. And then to close today, one last thing. I now have a little note, a Post-it note, and I mentioned about how I like to stick little, I don't have a really good example of one handy, but a really small square of a Post-it where I write little notes to myself. And one of them is think before you buy a book on Amazon. It's not that I, don't like Amazon, but I'm also trying to think about how we might support our university presses. And so my first thought is to try to, when I'm buying a university press book for, something I'm using for research, is to try to buy it through the university press first and support those places. That's kind of going along with the subject of books, but it also lets me kind of think if I really want this book, I'm going to go through the trouble of getting it through one of those press websites versus Amazon or some other place. Just to try to support some of those places. But It does also give me pause to kind of think about, well, do I actually need to add this book to my office collection? Is this something that I absolutely need to have? And sometimes the answer is yes. I know I did not say anything about digital books in this episode, and because I don't have a Kindle and I don't do any digital reading, I'm not the authority on how to organize those sorts of things. But if anybody has any tips, please, stick them on Twitter. If you want to email me at Christine@Defend and Publish, we would love to hear some of these tips on that, because all of these are all the strategies for managing books in general for academia are useful to have. And I promise in a future episode, I will do something with academic articles and storage and things like that, because I know that's something that we need. But right now, just thinking about some physical books and doing a little summer resetting in our offices. Happy writing.